Imagine a single fading photograph. A 3-year-old girl wearing a crisp white sailor dress, her dark hair tied into neat pigtails, flashing a smile that reveals the innocent gap between her 2 front baby teeth. That fragile image, captured in the early days of 1983, was destined to become the face of a ghost. For over 4 decades, it haunted flyers, national databases, and the shattered heart of a father who absolutely refused to let the world forget her. Her name was Michelle Marie Newton. To the family who adored her, she was simply Little Shelley. And on the 2nd of April, 1983, she vanished from Louisville, Kentucky, taking her mother, Deborah Lee Newton, with her. This is not the story of a stranger lurking in the shadows of a grocery store parking lot. And this is the story of a parental abduction, a crime that leaves a unique, agonizing void in its wake. Yet, for reasons that baffle the mind, this mystery sat in the dark for 42 years. It took modern forensics, an eagle-eyed tipster, and a father's undying devotion to drag the truth back into the light. Welcome to Famous Cold Case, where we give a voice to the voiceless and ensure no victim is ever left behind. Let us pull back the curtain to the spring of 1983. Life in the blue-collar neighborhoods of Louisville moved at a steady, reliable pace. Joseph Newton, known to everyone simply as Joe, was 33 years old. He was a man defined by his calloused hands and his unwavering dedication to his young family. He and his wife Deborah had built a quiet life together. But the undisputed center of their universe arrived on the 5th of October, 1979, when Michelle was born. Friends and neighbors warmly remembered Shelley as a bright, endlessly curious toddler who was always ready to offer a hug. She adored her stuffed animals and lived for the evenings when she could ride on her father's shoulders during their sunset walks beneath the old oak trees. That spring, the Newton family was preparing for a massive transition. Joe had secured a promising opportunity for better work down in Georgia. It promised warmer weather, a more manageable cost of living, and a fresh slate for the 3 of them. Deborah appeared enthusiastic about the upcoming move. She suggested a plan to Joe. She would drive down first to scout for apartments, sign a lease, and set up their new home so that everything would be perfect when Joe followed a few weeks later. On the crisp morning of April 2nd, 1983, Deborah packed her suitcases into the trunk of her modest sedan, bearing Kentucky license plates. She securely buckled 3-year-old Michelle into her car seat, kissed Joe goodbye on the driveway, and promised to call the very moment they crossed into Georgia and found a place to rest. From the back seat, the little girl in her favorite sailor outfit waved her small hand, entirely oblivious to the fact that it would be the final time her father would see her face for a lifetime. Joe remained behind in Louisville to tie up the loose ends of their life. He needed to finalize his resignation at work and organize the packing of their home. And he spent that first evening waiting by the landline, anticipating the familiar ring and Deborah's voice telling him they had arrived safely. The evening bled into the night, and the phone stayed agonizingly silent. A day passed, then 2. Joe frantically dialed the number Deborah had written down for a prospective rental office in Clayton County, Georgia. The line rang endlessly. He contacted distant relatives, mutual friends, and anyone who might have seen a young mother and a toddler traveling south on Interstate 75. No one had seen a thing. The creeping dread in Joe's chest transformed into sheer panic. He contacted the Louisville police, as was tragically common in the early 1980s. The initial responding officers treated the situation as a trivial domestic dispute. They assumed a young mother had simply needed a few days to cool off from marital stress. But as weeks dragged into months, the grim reality settled over the precinct. By the late spring, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office officially classified it as a missing persons investigation. Bulletins were printed for 24-year-old Deborah Lee Newton and 3-year-old Michelle Marie Newton. Joe cooperated with an agonizing desperation. He handed over every photograph, retraced every conversation, and even drove the over 815 miles to Georgia himself, knocking on strangers' doors with a fistful of flyers. The trail was absolutely non-existent. Sometime between the winter of 1984 and the dawn of 1985, the silence was broken by a single, terrifyingly brief phone call. Deborah called Joe. She offered no location, no apology, and no explanation for stealing his daughter. She spoke a few tense words, and the line went dead. That click would be the final sound Joe heard from his family for 40 years. In the summer of 1985, a Jefferson County grand jury rightfully indicted Deborah on felony charges of custodial interference. Because she had crossed state lines, the crime carried no statute of limitations in Kentucky. The Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped in, issuing an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant. Deborah's face was plastered on posters inside federal buildings from coast to coast. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, known as NCMEC, commissioned an age-progressed sketch of what little Michelle might look like as an older child. The image circulated widely, it generating a flurry of tips: a waitress in Atlanta, a quiet neighbor in Alabama, a mother passing through Chattanooga. Joe drove to every single location, sitting in his parked car outside diners and grocery stores, praying to catch a glimpse of the woman who held his daughter captive. Every single lead was a phantom. Every dead end carved a deeper hollow into Joe's spirit, yet he refused to abandon the home they had shared. While other people might have moved on, Joe Newton stayed firmly planted in the exact same Louisville house. He kept Michelle's bedroom immaculately preserved. The stuffed animals remained lined up on her dresser, and a small pair of pink sneakers sat patiently by the door, waiting for feet that were growing up hundreds of miles away. If you are still watching at this point, I always drop a comment below with, "I am still here for Joe." Let us see who in our true crime family is truly following this heartbreaking journey. We see every single one of you who cares about these victims, and your support means the absolute world to us. You are the reason these cases never stay buried. As the 1990s gave way to the 2000s, the case suffered agonizing bureaucratic setbacks. In the year 2000, a clerical failure within the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office led to the dismissal of the original 1985 indictment without prejudice. It was a paperwork catastrophe, a symptom of retiring prosecutors and overwhelmed cold case units, but importantly, it was not an exoneration. The felony could be reindicted the moment Deborah resurfaced. Through it all, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children kept the file aggressively active. In the year 2010, their forensic artists released a brand new, highly sophisticated age progression image. It depicted what Deborah might look like at 54 years old, highlighting the imagined gray streaks in her dark hair and the natural softening of her jawline. But still, the years ticked by without a whisper. Detectives retired, case files gathered a thick layer of dust in metal cabinets, and the world largely forgot about the little girl in the sailor dress. The dam finally broke in the late autumn of 2025. On a balmy Tuesday afternoon in early November, a tip was logged into the Marion County Crime Stoppers hotline in Florida. The anonymous female caller possessed a calm, incredibly observant demeanor. She explained that she frequently browsed missing children databases and had stumbled upon the 2010 age progression photo of Deborah Newton. She then pointed investigators to a sprawling, heavily populated retirement community in central Florida known as the Villages. There was a woman living there, she claimed, who went by the name of Sharon Neely. She kept to herself, lived a remarkably quiet life, and bore a bone-chilling resemblance to the fugitive from Kentucky. The tip landed on the desk of a veteran cold case investigator named Mark Harland. Harland had chased 100 mirages in his career, but this one felt entirely different. It was specific. It provided a tangible alias, a physical address, and a community. Harland immediately pulled the property records for Marion County. A woman named Sharon Neely, whose listed birth month and year aligned perfectly with Deborah's actual age of 66, owned a modest villa in the Villages. Harland contacted local Florida authorities, who discreetly pulled a recent driver's license photo and covertly snapped surveillance pictures of Sharon walking her small dog down a sun-drenched cul-de-sac. When Harland placed the surveillance photos next to the 2010 age progression sketch, the breath left his lungs, the downward tilt of her mouth, the unique slope of her shoulders, the exact shape of her cheekbones. It was her. But visual similarity is not enough to secure a conviction after 4 decades. Harland needed biological proof. He drove to the east side of Louisville to visit Deborah's younger sister, Lisa. Lisa had spent her entire adult life agonizing over her missing niece. When Harland gently explained the situation, Lisa did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She provided a voluntary reference DNA sample, praying it would be the key to unlocking the nightmare. Armed with probable cause, Florida judges swiftly signed a warrant for a buccal swab. In mid-November 2025, plainclothes detectives knocked on Sharon Neely's door. When she answered, they presented the warrant. She did not scream. She did not feign outrage. She simply looked at the badge, her shoulders slumping in quiet defeat, and allowed them to swab the inside of her cheek. The samples were expedited to the forensic laboratory. Within days, the results illuminated Harland's inbox like a beacon. It was a 99.9% match. Sharon Neely was, without a shadow of a scientific doubt, the biological mother of Michelle Marie Newton. Law enforcement moved with lightning speed, knowing a flight risk of her caliber could disappear again in an instant. On Wednesday, the 26th of November, 2025, the very day before Thanksgiving, unmarked vehicles surrounded the beige villa in Florida. As Sharon stepped out of her house, carrying a canvas tote bag to run holiday errands, a deputy approached her. He calmly informed her that he held a fugitive warrant out of Jefferson County, Kentucky, for custodial interference in the first degree. The facade finally shattered. As she was placed in handcuffs, a neighbor watering his lawn across the street, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation, jokingly called out, telling Sharon that the police were finally coming for her. The body camera captured her looking down at the concrete, whispering softly that she never meant for it to go on this long. But while Deborah was being booked into a holding cell to await extradition, a far more delicate and deeply traumatic operation was unfolding 30 minutes away. Social workers and plainclothes deputies knocked on the door of a 46-year-old veterinary technician living an unremarkable, peaceful life. Her legal documents identified her as Alexis Marie Carter. When she invited the solemn officials inside, they sat her down and laid 3 photographs on her coffee table: the toddler in the sailor dress, the age progression, and the mugshot of the woman she believed was her mother. Gently, they unraveled the entirely fabricated reality of her existence. And they explained that her father had not died when she was a baby, as she had been told her entire life. They told her she was Michelle Marie Newton, a missing child, and that a man in Kentucky had been waiting over 40 years for her to come home. The shock paralyzed her. But as the truth washed over her, she looked at the social worker with tears pooling in her eyes and asked a single, life-altering question: "Can I meet him?" The very next day was Thanksgiving Day, Thursday, the 27th of November, 2025. In Louisville, Joe Newton woke up in the exact same house he had refused to sell. He cooked his traditional solitary meal, but this time, his hands trembled as he set a second plate on the table. That afternoon, a vehicle pulled up to the curb outside his home. A 46-year-old woman stepped out, and walking slowly up the driveway she had last seen as a toddler. When Joe opened the front door, the decades of unimaginable grief evaporated in an instant. He saw the gentle eyes of his little girl. She saw the exhausted, loving face of a man who had kept her childhood bedroom waiting for 42 years. They collapsed into each other's arms on the porch, crying tears that had been trapped since 1983. As of early 2026, the legal ramifications for Deborah Newton are still actively unfolding as she faces justice in a Kentucky courtroom following her extradition. Michelle is navigating the impossibly complex emotional landscape of loving the mother who raised her while fiercely embracing the father who never gave up. But one thing is absolute. The haunting photograph of the little girl on the flyer has finally been replaced by a living, breathing woman who knows exactly who she is and exactly where she belongs. If you want justice for victims like Michelle and believe that fathers like Joe deserve to be heard, show your support in 1 second by liking this video and subscribing to Famous Cold Case. We pour our hearts into bringing these forgotten mysteries to light, and having you in our true crime family means everything to us. Hit that subscribe button and let us keep fighting for the truth together.